Hello, everybody. Welcome into GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, January 31st, the end of the first month of 2025, and we have a lot to get into today. The NBA-All-Star team has officially been rounded out. The reserves were announced. We'll go over the starters, the reserves, and a couple of snubs as well, as there always are on the NBA All-Star teams. Then we'll get into a little bit of NFL drama. Receivers. Where will they go? Liam Coen and the Bucs continue to have their falling out. Get into some ESPN and NHL money stuff as we get later on into the show. Lots to talk about today. But before we get into the NBA, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. You can use that super chat feature. If you do, leave a chat or a message. I'll get to it as soon as I possibly can. Feel free to do that. Appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, January 31st. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the NBA All-Star game here. This one is the biggest thing that's been going on in the world of sports today, right? The All-Star teams announced. This is going to be a really different version than we've ever seen. They're going to have the crew from inside the NBA be the honorary GMs for the three teams, and then the fourth team be comprised of those young guys, these young stars, first and second year guys, the rising stars. Whoever wins that game will be the fourth one in the round robin tournament that they're going to do in the All-Star game. But getting to the rosters, starting off in the Eastern Conference, we'll start with the starters and then we'll get into the reserves. The New York Knicks had two starters in the East. They had Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns. And both of these guys have had incredible seasons. In the Eastern Conference, especially for the starting positions, I don't think there really was too much of a question for who was going to end up starting. I think the fact that you have those two New York guys, you add Donovan Mitchell, who's been the leader of the best team on the East this year, and you add Jason Tatum and Giannis Antetokounmpo, who have been amazing for their teams. If you're going to take one of those guys out, I think it would be Jason Tatum here, but all of them deserve to be starters here, to see all of these guys come out there and get those starting spots, some of them for the first time in their careers, has been really cool to see. But getting into the reserves, the breaking news here, Jaylen Brown, the second Boston player to find his way onto the All-Star roster. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, that deadly duo over there, making an appearance in the Eastern Conference. Again, this isn't going to be the final team, but next to him, you have Pascal Siakam, who's been the lead guy over there in Indiana. The Indiana Pacers started off the season slow, Tyrese Halliburton not having the kind of season that you would expect or need Tyrese Halliburton to have, but Pascal Siakam has stepped up huge, and he has been the main reason why they were able to steady the ship a little bit. Of course, Hallie has stepped up, played pretty good basketball in his own right, is a guy that could potentially even be considered a snub. Not sure if he's going to be there, but I love that they added Pascal Siakam in there. He's had a great year so far. Darius Garland, the second Cleveland Cavalier to find their way into the All-Star game, and you got that whole backcourt in there now. Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, those two guys have been instrumental. Them, along with their big men, one of which making the All-Star game with them in Evan Mobley, have been huge in showing in making this team the best that it can be, right? Evan Mobley, a first-time All-Star, one of six guys to make the All-Star game for the first time this in their career. Excuse me. We get into a game with we get into the games with these guys, right? And they have really stepped up, right? They were a 4 seed last year. Kenny Atkinson comes in as the new head coach, and now they're the number 1 seed in the East. Not too much has changed really as far as the roster in there, but what they've been able to do step up this season is huge, and I'm glad that they get 3 guys. That's the most of any team in either the West or the Eastern Conference this year. Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell being a starter. You also have Cade Cunningham, his first time ever making the All-Star team. Cade Cunningham has been the guy in Detroit, and the Detroit Pistons have had a season to remember. After having one of the worst seasons in the history of the NBA, they go out there and now they're sitting at around 500. That's about as big of a shift in momentum as you can possibly expect for a team to have. It's been really cool to see this team, this group of guys get so much better again. Just with the addition of a new head coach, him and Tobias Harris have come in and completely changed the way that this team looks, the way that this team feels, and the way that this team plays. Cade Cunningham, his first All-Star game of his career, and that's super exciting for the fans over there in Detroit. They've got a great one over there. Damian Lillard, the second star over there in Milwaukee, finds his way to play with his partner in crime in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Those two guys find their way onto the All-Star team. Dame's been having a really good offensive season. Of course he has. He makes his way onto the All-Star team for the 9th time of his career. And this is an Eastern Conference team that I think is really stacked, especially when you add that final guy, Tyler Hero. And some people I've heard have wanted Tyler Hero to not make the list. They've said that he's the weakest guy there. But what Tyler Hero's been able to do with this Miami team to keep them at 500 overall is crazy, right? Tyler Hero has been able to deal with all the noise that Jimmy Butler and this Heat team have been going through, right? He's been able to deal with a down year from Bam Adebayo. He's been able to deal with all of that, really stepped up, had career highs in just about every single category, and he's been the guy leading this Heat team. This Heat team, without their two stars really having great performances, would be nowhere without Tyler Hero. So to say that he doesn't deserve to be an All-Star is crazy to me. There are plenty of other guys out there that I think did deserve to be All-Stars, but I think overall, they got this list pretty close to right. There were a couple snubs out there in the East, especially with the guards. LaMelo Ball is an interesting one because LaMelo Ball won the fan vote at the guard position. He had the most amount of votes out of every single guard in the NBA. He ends up having more points, assists, and if you're just going off the stats like that, than everybody else. But that Charlotte Hornets team is not very good. He doesn't make the reserves, and I can understand you thinking him a snub, but he's a guy that I don't think should have gotten in over a couple of these guys. I like LaMelo Ball a lot, and he's played really good basketball, but I do understand why they didn't put him in. Trae Young is another name that's been tossed around as far as snubs in the Eastern Conference go. Trae Young leads the league in assists, and he continues to get snubbed a lot of years in a row now. He doesn't have that kind of all-star pedigree that a lot of people with what he's been able to do, I think, deserve to have. That's someone that I think is a snub, but again, I'm not putting him in over Tyler Hero. You can talk to me about potentially putting him in over a guy like Pascal Siakam, maybe a Jaylen Brown, potentially Cade Cunningham. But at the end of the day, I don't think these guys are really getting in over the other ones. It's just kind of an overwhelming amount of talent. That's the reason that these guys are snubs rather than the fact that the guys that got in didn't deserve to get in. Scotty Barnes, another one of those guys. He made an All-Star game last year, but one of the bigger ones that I've seen around the East as well is Tyrese Maxey. Tyrese Maxey has been the lone member of the big three for the Philadelphia 76ers to be consistently out there and consistently playing. He averages 27 points a game, and he's a guy that I think should have gotten a lot more credit in an All-Star nod. Again, This is a 76ers team that's dealt with a lot of injuries. They haven't been as successful. And a lot of basketball is politics, right? A lot of basketball and a lot of these things is, hey, if your team is good, you're going to have a better shot. But all of these guys deserve to get it. Tyrese Maxey, LaMelo Ball, Trae Young. But at the end of the day, there's just not enough spots for them. There just isn't. And it's unfortunate. I understand why some people think they might be better than Tyler Hero if you look at the stats, but what Tyler Hero has been able to do as a one-man army on that Heat team, I think deserves to be kept in. At the end of the day, I think they got these All-Star teams as close to correct as you possibly can. You're never going to be able to escape All-Star selection with everybody happy. You're never going to be able to escape All-Star selection with no panic, with no rioting from fans and stuff. But at the end of the day, I think this is one of the more accurate ones of all time, and at least in a very long time. And I don't think there were too many snubs that you couldn't justify them not being in there over a couple other guys. But let me know what you think. Do you think any of these guys really were snubs? We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the Western Conference. They have a lot of old heads in the starting lineup. Some people think that they shouldn't be starting. Some people think there were a couple big snubs over there as well. We'll talk about that and much more coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, January 31st. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the Eastern All-Stars in the NBA. In this segment, we turn our attention to the Western Conference. The West has a lot of old heads over there. We're going to talk about if they deserve to get in and all their accomplishments. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, January 30th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the Western side of the NBA All-Star selections. And this one, again, I think they did a pretty good job on. There's a couple things that you had to have in there. There's a couple guys that I think deserved to get in that did not get in. But overall, I think the NBA All-Star teams this year were really close to perfect. Of course, you're never going to be able to get it all the way perfect. But starting off with the starters. Point guard Steph Curry finds his way back into the starting lineup, and he's a guy that's been amazing. Of course, over the course of his career, but this season is no exception. This is probably the worst Golden State squad that he's been on since their dynasty began, dating back to probably 2012, 2013. This is a really good Steph Curry season. Now, it isn't the best Steph Curry season. It isn't an MVP level Steph Curry season, but he's a guy that I think deserves to be named an all-star starter for what he's been able to do with this team as well, even though some of his stats might not line up with the best in the league at every single point. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the MVP frontrunner, also named a starter. Of course, the MVP frontrunner named a starter. I don't think anybody has any objections to this. He's been amazing all year for the number 1 seed Oklahoma City Thunder. A huge reason why they've been able to have this turnaround so quickly. Was traded over from the LA Clipper side of the Paul George trade. Obviously worked out a little bit better for them than it has for the Clippers so far. LeBron James is back in the starting lineup as well. 21-time All-Star, 21-time All-Star starter. LeBron James, the ageless wonder, continues to just do the impossible, right? He's been amazing this year. He's over 20 points a game. He's been incredibly productive on offense, on defense, rebounding, assists, every single number that you possibly could look at. He's been breaking all these records for 40-year-old players. He is amazing. LeBron James, an all-star starter, and he deserves to be there as well. Kevin Durant, out of the Phoenix Suns, is also an all-star starter. You're getting that that big three from the Team USA back together here. Kevin Durant has been amazing all season. This is a Phoenix Suns team that has been kind of iffy, but when Kevin Durant is on the court, they are much closer to being a title contending team than they are to being a play-in team. He has been that kind of player for them this year, and he has been the main reason why the Phoenix Suns are even competitive at all. The final starter is, of course, Nikola Jokic. Nikola Jokic, best player in the world. Nikola Jokic continues to do dominant things. He's arguably playing the best ball of his entire career. He's doing it without the best production from some of his co-stars. Jamal Murray hasn't been his best. Russell Westbrook has been good, but hasn't been completely consistent. He's dealt with injuries from Aaron Gordon in the early season. This is a really good year from Jokic, and he's deservingly so a starter out of Denver. Getting into the reserves here, Anthony Edwards headlines the reserves there. He has been awesome this season, and one of the big things about him this year is that he's developed a three-point shot. That was one of the things that wasn't really there for him last year in their deep playoff run, but now he's one of the most high-volume, high-efficiency three-point scorers in the entire NBA. He's over 40% from three, around 42%. He's developed that shot in one offseason, and he is going to be a guy that's going to be a problem in the league for a very, very long time. Anthony Davis also makes it as a reserve. We'll have to see if he ends up playing due to his injuries. That could open the door for a guy like a Domantas Sabonis or a Norman Powell to find their way onto the All-Star squad, but we will see what happens after he gets reevaluated. But Anthony Davis, I don't think anyone is arguing, deserves to make a spot. Him and LeBron James at the top of the Lakers have been amazing this year, right? He's been one of the best on both sides of the court, Anthony Davis has. He's been probably the best Laker this season, even better than LeBron, I think. But what he's been able to do as far as an energy player, as far as a defender, really, has been so valuable to this Lakers squad, and he deserves to make it. James Harden held down the fort over there with the Los Angeles Clippers. That was crazy to me. Right? The fact that he was able to turn back the clock and be that number one star again when they were waiting on a guy like Kawhi Leonard to come back from injury that he was out indefinitely for at the beginning of the season. Norman Powell has stepped up huge, and he's a guy that I think deserves a couple nods, but what James Harden has been able to do as the leader of that team is amazing. Keeping the Clippers in a playoff spot, in a playoff eligible run here, that is really cool to see. Jaren Jackson Jr. from the Memphis Grizzlies makes his team's all-star spot. It would have been Ja Morant probably. The Memphis Grizzlies had to have one. I think this Grizzlies team is pretty balanced. What JJJ is able to do on the offensive and defensive end is probably made him the obvious choice. Without Ja Morant being injured as much as he has, it's a little bit harder to find some more options on the Memphis Grizzlies team, but JJJ has been amazing this season, as he always has, his third All-Star selection. Alperen Sengun, out of the Houston Rockets, that's their lone All-Star this year. Sengun is a guy that I think got in because the Rockets needed one. The Rockets needed to get a guy, but they're a young team, and they've really split up the workload. But what Sengun's been able to do this season, people call him a baby Jokic for a reason, right? He's not as good as Jokic, but he does a lot of the same things as a big man, being able to pass, being able to shoot, being able to guard a lot of different players all over the floor. Sengun is a guy that finally gets his first All-Star nod, and he's still really young. He's still getting a lot of he's still got a long way to grow. This is a Rockets team that's going to be good for a long time if they can continue to develop and keep that talent. As well as another young guy making his first All-Star appearance. How about Jalen Williams? Jalen Williams from the OKC Thunder, their second member. He's been that second star, right? When Shea's been amazing, he's been that MVP kind of guy. But what Jalen Williams has been able to do this season is nothing short of great, especially on the defensive end. One of the best guys at picking your pocket in the entire league, Jalen Williams. Congratulations to him on making that All-Star spot. And the final one, who else but Victor Wembanyama? Victor Wembanyama makes his first All-Star game in his second season. Victor Wembanyama continues to grow. He continues to get better at basketball every single time he steps out there, and he's a guy that is drawing more and more attention around the league. He's a guy that has lived up to the hype. He's lived up to the hype of being potentially the greatest basketball player ever, right? he's not all the way there yet, but you can see the potential, see the way he grows. You see the way players are demanding trades to go and play with him. He's going to be a special player in the league for a long time, and he makes his first NBA All-Star game. But a couple of those reserves that got snubbed, and we kind of touched on it a little bit. Domantas Sabonis, he gets left out of the All-Star game yet again. Domantas Sabonis has been a leader over there for the Kings, averaging a double-double basically every single night. He has been the guy that they rely on, along with De'Aaron Fox, who now wants out. But Domantas Sabonis has been a huge part of what they do, and since they've started to become more successful, he just does not make the cut. But the guy that I think really should have gotten in is Norman Powell. Norman Powell is averaging 24 points per game. Norman Powell with the Los Angeles Clippers has been as much of the reason that they've been good as James Harden has. And I understand that there's only enough room, and you're going to go to James Harden, the more recognizable one, the one that is getting, more of that fan vote over there. But arguably, Norman Powell has been the bigger reason why they've been able to hold firm. James Harden is a guy that it's tough to have him do it all on his own. What Norman Powell's been able to do as a 1A or a 1B kind of scoring options is huge for them, and it's the reason why they've been able to find themselves in this playoff position as they get deeper and deeper into the year. Kawhi Leonard comes back and they're still alive. That is huge for them. But again, overall, there's just not a place for these people to go. Maybe you put them in over Şengün, but you need a Houston player to come in. They're in the number 2 spot in the West. You can't just not have a player from them. With Anthony Edwards being injured, maybe they find their way in over them. Maybe Norman Powell finds his way in. Maybe Domantas Sabonis finds his way in. But we're just going to have to see about that. But again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of this. Who was the biggest snub in the All-Star game this year? Who out of the West do you think should have and shouldn't have made it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we turn our attention to some news coming out of the NFL, some coaching issues, and some wide receiver news from around the world of the NFL. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
Of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you're just tuning in, we just finished going over the NBAAll-Star selections, the Western and Eastern Conference. In this segment, we're going to take a look at some of the NFL news, some coaching drama between Liam Coen, the new head coach of the Jags, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as well as some wide receiver moves and rumors from around the NFL as we get into the offseason coming up soon. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, January 31st. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit of NFL talk here. The NFL, we're going to start off with the coaching side of things as the messy divorce between Liam Coen and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers continues to get messier. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, of course, if you're unfamiliar with the saga, thought they were getting Liam Coen back as their offensive coordinator. he goes and has a secret meeting with the Jags and finds his way to be their next head coach after originally pulling his name out of consideration. They then fire their GM, and everything turns around. He gets himself a head coaching opportunity. Now he's looking to fill out his staff. And the Tampa Bay Bucs are still not happy about the whole situation. They were about to make him one of the highest paid coordinators in the history of the NFL. They were happy to have him back. They were ready. They had the contract all drawn up. He was supposed to go sign that contract. He was supposed to go over there and sign to be the Bucs continue being the Bucs offensive coordinator. Instead, they need to find their fourth offensive coordinator in 4 years. Liam Coen, trying to fill out his staff here, is trying to get interviews, trying to have permission to interview offensive line coach Kevin Carberry and assistant offensive line coach Kevin Pickney. Right, these are guys that he's worked with, that he wanted to fill out his staff with, but the Bucs have denied that request. They're not going to let Liam Coen poach anybody else from their staff, and that's just them being a little petty after the whole messy divorce situation. They've also found their next offensive coordinator. The Bucs are elevating from within, bringing up Josh Gizzard. He was on the Bucs staff last season. He is now the new Bucs offensive coordinator. That is 4 offensive coordinators in the last 4 seasons for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They found a way to be successful under every single one of them, but eventually time is going to run out. Eventually they're going to run out of luck. They're going to run out of guys that can be these great offensive coordinators that are just waiting in the wings in this Bucs organization. But keeping a couple guys around, being petty with the Jags, I completely understand, especially after the way that Liam Coen walked out on you, just left you out to dry, ghosted you in the middle of the night, stopped responding to your messages and said, actually, I'm going somewhere else. It's a mess. It was a messy divorce, and it's going to be tough for Liam Coen to build out your staff. You know, all over the NFL, these teams that have been hiring from coordinators around the league, the Lions staff have been almost completely emptied out after Aaron Glenn has hired a bunch of people from them, after Ben Johnson has gone back to the well and hired a bunch of coaches from the Lions staff. This happens everywhere, right? When you leave a place, you have coaches you like, you have guys that you've talked about with, you're comfortable with, you want them to be with you, you want to elevate them, you want to promote them. These are guys that are coming in from that you're familiar with, and you see it, but it's just going to make the job a little bit harder on Liam Coen. But at the end of the day, I think it's probably best that for Liam Coen and the Jags that they weren't able to poach more from the Bucs. I think this Bucs coaching staff is good. I think it's good, and we've seen that from their ability to continue to find offensive coordinators after they leave to go get more guys and step up. But at the end of the day, what Liam Coen, I think, needs most in the building is not guys that are his friends, especially as a first-time head coach and offensive-minded guys that's going to go call plays. I think he needs someone that has done it before, can help him, figure out how to navigate being a head coach, because being a head coach is different than being an offensive coordinator. I'm not saying that Liam Coen doesn't have the ability to do it. Everything I've seen about him, he seems like he's doing his best to connect with the players. He's gotten better at saying Duval. They gave him another chance. But this is something that he's gonna have to learn. And having an experienced guy, one of the more positive trends in the NFL as far as hiring goes is when you have an offensive-minded head coach and a former defensive coordinator and former head coach as a defensive coordinator. If they can go out and hire someone like that, I think that would be huge for this Jags team to go out and get success, to go out and build around Trevor Lawrence, to build around some of the talented pieces that they have on both offense and on defense. That's not going to be easy to do, but I think the Bucs turning down his ability to go and get guys that he likes from that staff is going to help him be a better head coach at the end of the day. But that's not the only NFL news that I wanted to go over. There's also some NFL wide receiver drama, and it's not just with the Bengals. We'll start off with the Bengals because they need to go and figure out what they're doing at the wide receiver position. They need to go and they need to find which one they're going to pay. Jamar Chase, who just ended up winning the Triple Crown for wide receivers, the second guy to do it in the last 5 years after Cooper Kupp did it not too long ago. He's the other one that we're going to talk about here in a second. But the Bengals need to sign either him, Jamar Chase, or they need to go ahead and get T. Higgins because both of those guys are due for contract extensions. They franchise tagged T. Higgins last season. Both of these guys seems like they want to come back to play with Joe Burrow, to play with the Bengals, but they don't have the money to do that. The way that defense was playing, committing what will be at this point around $65 million to your wide receiver position after already committing $55 million to your quarterback position, that puts $120 million total on the offensive side of the ball when the defense was playing historically bad throughout the course of the NFL season this year. This is one where we turn around and we say one of them is just going to have to go. But the bigger story with this is not the fact that they're not going to be able to pay both of them. The bigger fact is that this happened because they were cheap. And the Bengals ownership has a history of being cheap, right? A long time. They have a history of not getting the facilities right for their players, not dishing out the money for their players, frankly, not having the money to pay their players, right? But what this says to me more than anything is there's a consequence to not paying your guys. And I don't know why when you have these guys that you have decided that you want to pay, you have these guys that you've decided you want to keep around, you're not going to do it. Because the way that the NFL works, the salary cap's going to continue to go up. That's why we see contracts like Patrick Mahomes, who's at the time signed what was a $500 million contract. Of course, not all of it guaranteed, but a $500 million contract ended up being team-friendly over 10 years because it ages better the longer that contract is. Because the salary cap and players' salaries themselves are going to continue to go up. The wide receiver market exploded last offseason. You could have gotten T. Higgins for $20 million if you signed him early enough last offseason, and he was eligible for that contract way early on in the offseason. Instead, now wide receiver contracts are up at $34, $35, $36 million a year. You could have signed Jamar Chase for $30 million, $35 million a year. Instead, now you're going to have to pay Jamar Chase $42 million a year. He's going to want to get paid like the best wide receiver in the world. Because he just won the Triple Crown for wide receivers. He currently, if you go off stats from last season, is the best wide receiver in the world. T. Higgins, not too far behind him, is going to be asking for Brandon Ayuk type money. He's going to be asking for $30 million. These are the guys that you could have saved an extra $15 million a year if you would sign them last season. You could have saved $15 to $20 million a year if you, as the Bengals ownership, had said, you know what, we're going to swallow this now so that it looks better in the future on our books. You had the cap space to do it, and now they're just going to have to lose one of them. Of course, it seems like they're going to lose T. Higgins. I don't know how you let Jamar Chase go, but that extra $15 million, that could have been used to go out and get a solid defender, a good safeties, a couple of corners, if you wanted to go out and get them that way in free agency, right? Being cheap is not good in the NFL. You need to go out, you need to spend on your guys, because at the end of the day, the quicker you spend on them, the more of a discount it's going to be in the future. And if you already know that you're going to keep them around, it doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense at all why you're waiting until they're able to be a free agent, until they hit the open market, until other teams can bid on them and the price tag gets higher and higher and higher, and you just eventually have to let them go. But the other piece of wide receiver news going on around the NFL is that Cooper Kupp, the previous winner of the Triple Crown, one of just 6 guys in the history of the NFL to do it, is apparently out of the Rams building. He in 2021, just 3 years ago at this point, won the Triple Crown, won the Super Bowl MVP, won a Super Bowl with the Rams, and an Offensive Player of the Year. He was amazing with them, and he's been dealing with his fair share of injuries. He's dealt with his fair share of injuries in the past. He's dealt with them recently. But now with Matthew Stafford coming back, it's announced, it seems as if the Rams are parting ways with Cooper Kupp. He really took a backseat last season to Puka Nacua, who emerged as a true wide receiver one over there. I thought it would be more of a 50-50 split, but he's going to hit that market, and he's a guy that at age in his 30s isn't going to command that top tier money. He's coming off of a little bit of a down year, a little bit of a year that, hey, that doesn't scream how good he is, but he's a guy that if he gets with the right quarterback, if he gets within the right system, and he's able to stay healthy, could be really, really good for any one of those teams to get. You go look at a team like the Bengals, we were just talking about. Say they sign Jamar Chase to that $40 million a year, and then they go get Cooper Kupp instead of for $30 million like they would have to do for a guy like T. Higgins. You might be able to get him for 1 year 20, 1 year 15. And there you go. You save a little bit of money. The Titans, of course, always looking for receivers. The Giants are a place that I think would be really cool to see. Cool to see a guy like Cooper Kupp in as a slot receiver. He's going to go just about anywhere he wants. Probably going to go to a contender. Maybe the Chiefs go and sign him. Maybe the Dolphins go out and get him. Maybe the Colts go out and get a receiver because they are sorely lacking in there. But Cooper Kupp is a guy that's going to hit the open market, and he's going to be one of the bigger fish out there in free agency. I'm curious how much he's going to go for, especially after a couple of down seasons and a couple of bad injuries for Cooper Kupp. But let me know what you think of what's going on with the wide receivers in the NFL. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, some back-end stuff with ESPN and the ACC. They've found a way to extend a TV deal after all the drama going through with lawsuits and everything going on in college football. The ACC is at least going to stay around until 2036. That's really huge. We'll talk about that coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found. For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, January 31st. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over some of the drama from around the NFL as the head coaching carousel continues to go on, and some wide receiver news is going on around the world of NFL. In this segment, we get to a little bit of college football, some back-end stuff on college football as the ACC and the ESPN have agreed to an extension on their TV rights deal. This is huge for a couple of reasons, as we'll get into in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, January 31st. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit of talk about a TV rights extension over in the ACC and ESPN. This is a huge deal because we have seen a lot of the conferences start to take a bigger hold of power in the world of college football. And one of the reasons they can do that is because, unlike a lot of other sports, these conferences negotiate their own TV deals. And this is what happened with the Pac-12. The Pac-12 didn't just implode for no reason. It didn't just implode last season because they decided, oh, we're leaving after last season. it imploded because they couldn't work out a TV rights deal. Now, of course, that's not the only reason. They couldn't work out a TV rights deal. Teams wanted to leave. But the main reason that they could leave was because they didn't have that broadcasting deal in place. They didn't have anywhere to broadcast those games, and that's where they're getting a lot of their money from. A lot of these teams were able to get poached. They were able to get out of their contracts that way, and it wasn't really a huge deal for them because they were getting all this money from these new TV revenue deals that they're getting at the Big Ten, with the ACC, with the SEC, with all these schools, with the Big 12, with all these TV deals that they're getting as a part of these new Big Four power conferences, right? So with the ACC and the Big 12 really losing a lot of ground to the Big Ten and the SEC, having that TV rights deal in place is going to be huge. And the ACC has been the one out of those four that seems like it's prone to falling apart. It seems like it's next in line to get imploded, to get picked off one by one. We've had Florida State suing the ACC, trying to figure out how to get out of the contract, trying to find a way into a new conference. Clemson, as same as them, has also had a couple lawsuits going up against the ACC, although they have said they're not actually trying to get out. They're just curious what their options are. Although, if they have a good one, I'm sure they might find their way out. Right now, the number was sitting at about $700 million to get out. That's not going to happen from any of these schools. But this TV rights deal, this TV rights extension, goes all the way through 2036. So the ACC will at least be around until then. That keeps this conference alive and kicking, which is what they need as we go through a huge transitional era of college football. What we say is a new era of college football kicking off last season with the 12-team college football playoff, with the NIL deals coming in. And as Congress and the NCAA continue to pass laws and settle lawsuits surrounding NIL, this is going to be something that's going to continue to develop. They're going to continue to find ways to go and grab more power. That's what we're seeing Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, continue to go do. They're having meetings with the Big Ten every single year, basically trying to consolidate as much power as possible, because in sports, you're never at the top for as long as you think you're going to be, right? It's always going up and down. The power balance is constantly shifting. So while you're at the top, if you can grab power, go ahead and do it. That's what the SEC and the Big Ten are trying to do, and we're already starting to see a shift towards the Big Ten and away from the SEC. And I'm sure the SEC is recognizing that, although maybe it's just a one-season thing. But what the ACC was able to do by securing this right through ESPN, it just keeps them alive. It keeps them kicking. And it's a concern because the Big 12 and the ACC are playing second fiddle to those two in the Power Four, at least when it comes to college football right now. In the ACC, what their bread and butter has been for a while has been college basketball. College basketball seems pretty healthy right now. And that's probably not one of their bigger concerns. But in college football, if they are to get disbanded, football's the big money maker. That's where all the NIL deals are going to go in through. That's where all this money is coming in and coming out of. Them being able to make this deal is huge, but it came with a couple of different concessions, right? Florida State and Clemson both wanted out. Because they weren't getting the appropriate amount of money, right? They thought that their programs were so huge, the ACC would die without them. They weren't getting compensated the right amount. This deal helps with that. It helps appease their claims. Both them, FSU, Clemson, Miami, and UNC, the Big Four of the ACC, as they have decided, get a little bit of a different pay package than the rest of the teams in the ACC. Now, SMU, who made the college football playoff last year, was one of their big moneymakers, has ceded 9 years of TV deals in order for the ACC to take them. So they're not going to get paid for another 8 years from this contract. That's going to suck for them as this money just continues to go up and negotiate. But what they're able to do by appeasing their big players keeps them in the league. And they're not necessarily wrong. If Clemson leaves, if FSU leaves, although FSU had a disaster season, if Miami leaves, these guys, the ACC isn't going to be looked at as a power conference, right? The brand is only as strong as its pieces at this point, and the brand has been built over years and years and years. But you see what's happening with the Pac-12, right? When they eventually reform, When they reform, they're going to be treated as a group of 5 school. They're going to be treated as, I guess, what would be called a group of 6 school now. They're not going to get back into the power conference, despite the name brand of the Pac-12 as they reform around Washington State and Oregon State. They're not getting that top tier money because they're not the Pac-12 anymore. They're remnants of the Pac-12. They're ghosts using a dead brand at this point. And the ACC can't have that happen to them if they want to keep afloat with the big boys at the top of the NCAA. And it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing that these guys are vying for power, and that the bigger thing is that it's working, right? The NCAA needs to find a way to, I don't say take the power back, because when the NCAA gets power hungry, it generally doesn't work out for fans, for schools, for just about anybody. But they need to find a way to control these teams, make the balance of power at least a little bit more equal. Make it so that Greg Sankey isn't running everything. Make it so that the 2 commissioners at the top don't hijack the sport for when eventually it all comes crashing down. Because if everything keeps going the way it is, despite the ACC finding a way to keep their head afloat, keep floating here, it just feels like they're doing everything they can to stay alive, but it's not a winning battle. They're talking about potentially moving their championship game to being the 2nd and 3rd place teams and giving the 1st place team an automatic spot so they already have 2 spots in the college football playoff. That's just going to devalue that ACC brand. You're not going to get a true conference champion. It's just going to be a mess, right? Everything is changing in college football. It's a true period of transition, and as time continues to go on, as we see the differences that all of these moves are making, these programs, these conferences are doing everything they can to stay alive, and I'm really curious if this is how if it's going to end up working in the end. Getting this TV rights deal, getting this extension done is huge for the future of the ACC, and it's really important for the future of college football as well. I'm glad it's not just going to be 2 mega conferences running the sport for the next 40 years. But let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear them. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, some news from around hockey. Salary cap is about to explode. This is huge for them, for a league that hasn't always had the greatest trend as far as ratings and viewers go, but ever since they came back to ESPN, it's been really huge for them. The salary cap is about to explode, as well as a massive trade taking place between the Canucks and the Rangers. We'll talk about all of that and more coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, January 31st. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the massive TV rights extension deal the ACC signed with ESPN. In this segment, we continue our coverage of the NHL, this time talking a little bit about the salary cap that is about to explode. The NHL has long been a league that hasn't had the biggest money coming into or out of it, but that has changed in recent years, again, with a broadcasting deal with ESPN, bringing in more money, bringing more viewerships, bringing a more public eye to the sport, as well as a massive trade taking place between the Canucks and the Rangers. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you have a burning question about sports, anything that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, January 31st. But like I was saying, we are going to get into our final topic of the day, this having to do with the NHL. And like I said, the NHL salary cap is about to explode. The NHL salary cap has been pretty stagnant for a very long time, currently sitting at around $88 million per team, but it is about to go up massively. It's projected to go up $7 million, $7.5 million next season to $95.5 million. Right now, the big contracts that they're giving out are what's called 8x8s or 8x10s, right? 8 years, $10 million. And that's a large percentage of the salary cap they're given to some of their bigger players. But as we get to that percentage, as we get to around what that 12%-ish mark would be, it goes up from around $10 million to about $12 million as the years continue. By the time we get to 2027, they project the salary cap to go all the way up to $113 million, $113.5 million for the NHL as they continue to grow, as they continue to expand. This has come as a couple of sales of hockey teams have crossed the $1 billion mark. These franchises that historically haven't been the most valuable, probably the least valuable of the major four American sports here, have crossed the $1 billion mark. The Ottawa Senators over there in Canada sold for $1 billion. And the Arizona Coyotes, when they formed their new franchise, moved over to Utah, forming the Utah Hockey Club, name pending. They sold for $1.2 to $1.3 billion, right? That is a lot of money. When you are in the billions, that's when the sports leagues continue to grow, right? They're getting the money in. The revenues, the players, the fan bases are continuing to grow. You're getting more eyes on the sport, and we're seeing that start to show in the salary cap. As the league continues to grow, the salary cap's going to get bigger, the money's going to get bigger, and the league is in a really healthy spot right now. That's not something you could say for a long time about the NHL. The NHL has always been one of the quieter sports leagues in America, right? Of the four major American sports, it's number 4, and it's a pretty distant number 4 behind baseball, behind basketball, behind football, right? Behind the NFL, MLB, and NBA. The NHL has always played fourth fiddle to all of these guys, but as they get more recognition, as they get more prominent placement, as their sport and as their season continues to get more eyes on it, people are starting to enjoy. Fans are getting more invested. Ratings are getting higher, and it's really good for this sport. That's almost a $30 million jump in the salary cap over 3 years. That is huge for the NHL as they continue to grow their brand and get this back to a healthy spot as it was a little while ago. But it's not just that from around the NHL. Some breaking news has come up within the last hour or so as JT Miller, one of the stars of the Vancouver Canucks, has been traded to the New York Rangers. Said JT Miller and a couple of other players heading over in exchange for a first-round pick and 2 young talents from the Rangers. Now, JT Miller was formerly of the Rangers. JT Miller was a part of that kid line. He goes back to the Rangers, plays with Vincent Trocheck, that 1-2 punch for them up atop. They add another center, and JT Miller is going to do huge things for this team. What the Rangers have really struggled with this season has been offensively in the offensive zone. Adding JT Miller as a center, getting those draws on the faceoff, he's going to be an excellent number 1 or number 2 for them, and being able to get the gang back together in one of their more successful runs. You still have the goalie in Igor Shesterkin, who you were able to ride to an NHL Eastern Conference Finals appearance last season, nearly a Stanley Cup appearance before it all fell apart ahead of Sergei Bobrovsky and the Florida Panthers, who went on to win it all. This is a massive trade for them. This is going to get them back in the spotlight. This season hasn't been the greatest for the Rangers. It hasn't gone the way they expected it to. They're kind of treading water, trying to find a way into the playoffs as a wild card team. That Metropolitan Division has been a lot harder than they expected it to be, especially with the Washington Capitals being as explosive and as powerful of a force as they have been this season that not a lot of people saw coming. But this Rangers trade is huge. With the deadline about a month away, we're starting to see a couple big moves. Of course, there was the Mikko Rantanen trade that we saw heading over also in the Metropolitan Division with that Carolina Panthers team adding Mikko Rantanen and Taylor Hall in that massive 3-team trade was. This is going to be a really competitive race down the stretch in the Metro, and the NHL is heating up. It's really exciting around hockey these days. Huge trades, massive salary cap updates. Everything's going good for hockey. But let me know what your thoughts are on the trade, on what where the sport of hockey stands right now. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We will be back on Monday going over everything that happened this weekend as Super Bowl week starts off next. Can't wait to see you guys then. You all have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.